Welcome, everybody. Senator, I'm glad to see you this morning and welcome you to the Wilson Forum. We have spent much of the fall and, in fact, a good deal of last year on issues related to energy and electric generation. So this fall, we've had presentations from ISO New England, from the Home Energy Efficiency Team, HEAT, and last week, in fact, from your neighbor, Chris Knittel, who spoke with us. And we'll continue these conversations into the winter and spring of next year. It's a subject of deep interest to us. And it's especially important to us that your leadership on energy and climate issues in the Massachusetts legislature has been so important. So we're doubly glad, Senator, to welcome you to the Wilson Forum, and I will now leave the floor open for your conversation. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Ron. I want to say, how can we, I'd like to share a slide deck with you, which may require that I have some functionality I don't currently have, if someone can switch.
Let's see, maybe I need to make you co-host. Let's try that. Let's see if I can.
And Ron, could you mute everybody too?
I'm sorry. Let me take care of finding the senator. Should I make this Ethan or yourself, Senator?
Better to make it myself, I think, just in terms of spacing.
Let's see. I can't find everybody except Senator.
It says it's under state senator. The word state.
Yeah, now I've got a share screen.
Yeah, I'll find it. Hold on just a minute.
It's under SS, State Senator Mike Barrett.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. Here you go.
Good,
okay.
Good. And then, Ron, could you mute everybody?
Some of the older personnel.
Yeah, let's, yeah, I will. Hold on. Senator, you're up.
Can you folks see my screen, my slides?
Sure can.
Terrific. Well, very happy to be here, and I'm impressed with the august qualifications of this group, and knew I would be talking to some smart people who know what they're talking about. So I wanted to share with you a problem that legislators are wrestling with, and lots of people are engaged with in thinking about. It's a two-part problem, and I want to discuss not only the technical dimensions of it, which I know you guys will have a lot to say about, but also the political dimensions, if we will. And so this is an excerpt from the latest National Climate Assessment issued earlier this week. And one of the striking things about this national survey of what the climate's likely to do for us is that the chapter on the Northeast is sobering. It's not despairing, but it is sobering. The Northeast, as this circled paragraph indicates, is in for a lot of erratic weather, and that's going to cause the kind of flooding that we saw in Western Massachusetts and up in Fitchburg and Leominster this past summer. I want to balance this with some good news because, again, I don't want us to be unduly pessimistic. I just want us to be realistic. Northeast in general will see fewer impacts than the rest of the United States with regard to drought. According to national and international studies, we are likely to see fewer impacts due to forest fires, which will be serious threats, climate-induced, to other parts of the world and the United States. But where the Northeast remains vulnerable, there are other instances, as you all know, involving fisheries where we're vulnerable. But this question of extreme participation simply reminds us of what we already appreciate, and that's that the impacts of climate change are nearer at hand than studies of 10 years ago might have suggested. And the other thing worth thinking about as we approach any consideration of reducing emissions is that the US is not the world and Massachusetts is not the US. Here's a simple pie chart that depicts the sources of emission at a very broad level worldwide. And the one common sense thing that strikes you about this pie chart is that industrial emissions are very significant. I enjoyed the discussion that you guys have just had about greening cement. The less obvious but equally interesting aspect of a worldwide emissions allocation is that agriculture and land use is such a serious source of emissions, equivalent to that of industry. That's counterintuitive and certainly warrants our notice. But for today's purposes, the interesting thing is the contrast. If you go to the United States, industry remains at 24% as a source of emissions with which we all have to deal. Agriculture, though, downsizes by fully half. And of course, the rest of the pie starts to grow. When you come to Massachusetts, the world shifts yet again. Now you've got agriculture and land use as a source of emissions down to less than 1%. So the world's necessary preoccupation with agriculture, by which we mean everything from the production of meat to the use of fertilizers, is de minimis in Massachusetts. And look at the industrial source of pollutants in our state. This is what it means to be a post-industrial, knowledge-based economy, which is the economy that a lot of you folks were a part of and are a part of in terms of your professional working lives. To be knowledge-based reminds us, with respect to Holyoke and all kinds of other places, that we once had smokestack industries here. We once made things. And as those jobs have been lost, so have the pollutants been lost. What remains then for Massachusetts are just three sectors. In a sense, this is convenient. We have to focus on the emanations from buildings, transportation, and the production of electric power. A pie chart like this and a revised allocation like this, revised from what the world faces, enables us to really focus on what we need to do as our part of addressing the climate challenge. Transportation, buildings, and you, of course, at this point, you can subdivide buildings into commercial and residential, and the production of electricity. Here's another way of looking at it. This is just one of many snapshots that might be available to think about where we are. In terms of reductions during this particular 15-year period, global emissions have skyrocketed. That's the upward trending arrow on the right. The Northeast has done reasonably well, and Massachusetts is certainly there in the pack among the leaders, but we're not exemplary. Maine is exemplary for reasons that are peculiar to Maine and good for it. New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, Connecticut are all doing okay in terms of reducing their emissions. And we're all more or less, at least at this moment, traveling in the same direction. I mention this because I don't want, while I want us to be satisfied with our progress in Massachusetts, I don't want us to pat ourselves on the back unrealistically. We are among the leaders in reducing emissions, but we are not necessarily alone in the leadership. So we have a ways yet to go. Which brings us to this issue of cost that I want to discuss today. I'm worried about how we're going to afford everything. And I want to talk first of all about the production of electricity. As you all know, the solution, and it's remarkable that there's worldwide consensus on this point, and it's fortunate that there's worldwide consensus on this point. The solution, more or less, is to electrify everything if you want to reduce emissions and deal with the climate issue. I don't want to overstate this because, of course, there are revisions one could offer and comments one could offer at the margin. But fundamentally, you've got to electrify transportation by going to battery or hydrogen. You've got to electrify buildings by focusing first on energy efficiency and then on the installation of heat pumps and the use of geothermal resources. And you've got to electrify, of course, the production of electricity itself, not to 100% non-fossil fuel. We're not talking about an extreme position here, but directionally, what we've got to do is step up our production of electricity at the same time that we green the sources. So this is, I should have mentioned this, in 2022, the state legislature came up with a new approach to planning for electrical demand. And we required that the utilities in Massachusetts, and by that I mean, well, of course, we've got our munis are an important source of electric production, but most of the electricity is provided by investor-owned utilities, about 86% of it. And here we've got the requirement beginning last year that each of the utilities generate an electric sector modernization plan, an ESMP. And there is a review currently going on of the 3 ESMPs that the investor-owned utilities have generated. That review is consuming a lot of hours on the parts of a lot of people. I will say that the investor-owned utilities have done their homework and have labored very hard. National Grid's electric sector management plan is about 740 pages, very detailed, and even so, still lacking in important ingredients, but very detailed. Eversource's electric sector management plan is about 520 pages, again, impressively documented. And what you see here in this table are some simple depictions of some of the top line findings. Obviously, you're going to see a lot of electrical demand growing. The drivers of that demand will differ a little bit. It could be economic development, could be EVs, could be building electrification and base load or economic development in the case of Unitil. It is interesting, and it's a part of the puzzle, although I don't want to get into it too much, that as heat pump penetration grows in Eastern Mass and in the areas around Winchester in particular, for example, you're going to have a shift from a summer peak dominated by air conditioning needs to a winter peak driven by the conversion of heating capacity from fossil fuel to electrification. Again, we're not talking about a wholesale change. It's not going from 100% in fossil fuels. That's not where we are now. But it's not going from a fossil fuel dominated to a no fossil fuel future, but it is going to a future in which fossil fuels cannot dominate, natural gas included. So in any event, on the electric side, the conservative investor-owned utilities are telling us that we're going to have to build out the grid, something that we've seen in the newspaper and TV headlines as well. These electric sector modernization plans that talk about the challenges of building out the grid, as I say, are very granular. Here's a list included in the Eversource electric sector modernization plan, and Eversource serves Winchester. It serves my district, Lexington, Lincoln, Concord, and other places. So you see that Winchester, for example, the estimates here are of EV purchases. This is used as a baseline number to project future EV adoption by town. This is important for several reasons. Charging EVs put demands on the electric system and are one reason why we have to expand the grid. As we all know, it could well be true that electric sector batteries, EV batteries could serve as a source of storage. And for that reason, we want to know about EV penetrations too. This is only by way of suggesting that there's a lot of granularity to the projections that we're trying to make the utilities have done a good job, a serviceable job here in trying to at least surface every issue, although important details and important thoughtfulness of necessity is lacking in some instances too. We don't have to talk about this pie chart too much because I really want to get to a discussion with you all, but this is an attempt to isolate the portion of the Eversource market that includes, again, Winchester and suburbs to the west and to the northwest of Boston. And here, this was simply a representation of where distributed energy resources will contribute to the generation of electricity. The green on the left-hand pie chart, the distributed energy resources, or DER by type, is photovoltaics. So here's an attempt, again, as part of this comprehensive scanning of the way the grid has to morph, is an estimate of the solar panels on Winchester roofs and on the roofs of surrounding suburbs, largely some gateway cities. PVs are going to contribute a lot of power, but the grid, which is built to deliver electric power to your house, has to be recast, as you all know, in order to take electric power that you're generating on your house or on a ground-mounted solar site and deliver it to the grid, a different engineering problem. I will also mention that provision in the planning is made for combining photovoltaics with battery storage. And so that light green area estimates that for the neighborhood, again, that includes metropolitan area suburbs to the west and north of Boston, right now, PV and battery combined is about 28% of the contribution that green distributed energy is making to the grid, but as a consequence, creating challenges for a bidirectional grid too. So I'm just trying to, again, suggest that a lot of thought is being given to all the kinds of issues that I know you folks would give thought to. So what do we end up with? What we end up with in terms of a projection of what has to happen with the electric grid in Massachusetts is stunning. Here's just Eversource, which kind of shares the state with National Grid and with the munis. Here's what Eversource imagines has to happen by 2035. 17 new substations, which are major construction projects and electrical engineering undertakings. 26 substations have to be expanded. We're talking here about huge siting and permitting issues, huge procurement and supply chain challenges, and enormous financial burdens, essentially all of which has to be shouldered by you and your neighbors, me and my constituents. The difference here in orange and green is that orange is just to build out the grid to anticipate economic growth. The green specifically has to do with green energy, clean energy. And it is kind of interesting to stare at this slide just a little bit. What it's telling us is that the southeastern portion of Massachusetts has to build out a lot of electrical infrastructure, not merely to accommodate regular increases in load over time, but because wind offshore of the Cape and of southeastern Mass is going to come onto Massachusetts in the southeast. So all those green boxes in the lower right-hand corner are build-outs that will have to happen to take the product of offshore wind generators and to feed it into the New England grid. The other concentration you'll notice of distributed energy build-out or the green boxes is in Western Mass, because that's where the ground-mounted solar can be accommodated. So you're not going to see a lot of economic growth necessarily in the West, although we hope Holyoke and other places are exceptions to that. But you're definitely going to have to build out the grid to accommodate these DERs. So this is just in the next 10 years. I imagine what this slide is going to look like, if you begin to think about things with respect to 2050. National Grid, by the way, looks much like the same. 28 new substations in the portion of Massachusetts served by National Grid's electric division, an upgrade to 17. The electric sector modernization plan filed by National Grid doesn't use all the same color coding and doesn't necessarily track with the Eversource filing precisely, so the colors are different, but the scale of what's proposed, you can readily grasp. So if you're me, you're looking at all this, and of course, a number of responsibilities offer themselves. You have to figure out how to get all this built. You have to figure out if it should be built. I guess that's a foundational question, or whether there's a little bit of padding being entered into these plans at the margins. What's problematic, of course, is the utilities make all their money almost by building stuff. They get a guaranteed statutory rate of return that's ensured by state law for every physical piece of infrastructure they build. That's how they make most of their money. They make some of it in charging you for electricity and your monthly bills, but for the most part, the supply portion, the delivery portion of your bill goes to pay off debt incurred in building out this infrastructure. That's about half your bill. So this is going to contribute to the delivery side of your electric bill very substantially. If anything, like the current plans are realized. And as I was saying, you have to worry about whether everything in these electric sector modernization plans is justified, which is going to put an incredible strain on state government's resources, just to provide a check and balance to electric sector plants, because the utilities make so much money on everything they build. So is everything in the plan justified? That's a question one has to wrestle with. But assuming that most of it is, you then have to ask, how are we going to get the job done? And then you want to ask, how are we going to make sure that people can pay for it? I want to point out to you that worldwide, sudden increases in basic necessities, cost of living, and they can include the cost of fuel, can generate huge political counter reactions. If you go too far and you ask people to build or to pay for too much, you could see the green energy transition sidetracked. You've seen the yellow vest reaction 2 or 3 years ago in France to an increase in petrol prices. You see all kinds of conservative governments now running against current incumbent governments that talk about the necessity of a climate transition that of necessity imposes significant costs on people. So figuring out how to get all this done without burdening people so much that you trigger a march away from the transition altogether is something we politicians have to think about. And it's what I'm talking to you about today, actually. Because here's the rest of the problem. This is now we're switching to natural gas. That electrification strategy that all of us endorse with some qualifications to one degree or another assumes that we have to have your electric bill grow exponentially because of all that transition that I've just been discussing. The question is then, is there any relief available on the fossil fuel side? Electrifying buildings presumes that heating pumps will take the place in many cases of home heating oil furnaces and boilers, natural gas boilers. But if we have to pay for both at the same time, you're risking that political pushback that I've just referenced, right? So this is the GSEP forecast for the next several decades. GSEP is the Gas System Enhancement Program. It was the program set up 10 years ago to detect leaks in the natural gas systems that run through your neighborhoods and make sure those leaks are plugged, are ended in some fashion. This was a huge issue for advocacy groups. Mothers Out Front was a very prominent grassroots group that pushed the 2014 era reforms. And the idea was that, of course, we had to secure the safety of people, a concern that was validated because of those explosions in the Merrimack Valley in 2018, 5 years ago. So if you ask the same utilities, but now we're talking about the natural gas divisions, not the electric power divisions, National Grid and Eversource, to tell you where they're going with the GSEP effort, which is a leak detection and repair effort, here's what you learn. First of all, the program launched in 2014, 10 years ago. It's supposed to conclude in its original design in 20 years, or 2034. But because of the number of additional leaks found and because of the same kind of supply chain headaches that have caused delays worldwide in offshore wind, the program isn't progressing at the pace that had been originally envisioned for it by the utilities and by state government. So what I've circled here are costs in terms of, and we're talking about total miles of natural gas replacement and the total cost for the total miles per year. We now see that the costs have extended beyond 2034 out another 10 years to 2044. And we see that there's very significant costs projected if we're going to continue to plug the leaks in a system that's supposed to be replaced by the build out of the electric power grid that I referenced several minutes ago, and that we'll also be paying for. Here's another way of looking at it. And again, these are utility filings. The data is reasonably good. What's striking about this particular graph is that the brown upticks indicate that leaks are being repaired by year. There's real construction going on. But what's striking is that as significant numbers of repairs have been had or somehow dealt with, the total leaks in the system aren't declining much. We're discovering as many new leaks, not almost as many as we are repairing. And as a consequence, the blue lines are descending, but only incrementally. We've got a very aging system. You all know that Massachusetts was first, it was the pride of the state 125, 130 years ago to install natural gas. And the wages of being first and of being innovators a century ago is that now we have a system that we didn't address, much like the MBTA, and that we now must turn to. This is just a reminder to me that the big blue part of this donut is our towns. The part of the national grid, natural gas. Eversource does your electricity, and as you all know, in Winchester and other places, National Grid does your natural gas. The Boston gas territory, which includes the suburbs to the west of the city, account for the lion's share of the leaks, at least measured by the end of 2019. So we're talking about our backyard. That's just a way of centering this discussion a little bit. What's alarming to me when I think about my constituents and about the ratepayers of Massachusetts is that the cost per mile of replacement gas pipeline is going up significantly by the year. I haven't calculated the percentages here, but I think we would find that the increase in price unit cost per mile from 2017 to 2020 has exceeded the rate of general inflation. So if the program is going to go beyond 2034 to 2044, we're talking about significant costs, but actually even thinking about 2044 understates the nature of the challenge because of the way gas pipeline investments are financed. And again, many of you are familiar with this, but an initial capital spending commitment to deal with natural gas pipeline repair or replacement might be a $100 million proposition in 2021. By the time you pay back the bonds that you issued in order to finance $100 million worth of replacement, the accumulated costs bring out your commitment as a state and as a set of ratepayers all the way to 2051. So you can imagine what similar projections are as we undertake capital spending in 2024 and years after that. It takes a very long time to finally remove this burden from the state's ratepayers. So here's what's plaguing me. There are many dimensions of this that we can talk about, and I would certainly welcome your observations, but I'm thinking, as I say, about costs today. If we're going to pay for that electric sector build out, the construction of all these new substations to electrify and the expansion of other substations, and we're going to endure all the difficulty with siting and permitting those pieces of electric infrastructure that I mentioned minutes ago. And we're also going to have to continue to repair and replace the gas system that is supposed to be eased out or phased out. How do we do both without burdening the ratepayers in a way that they can't easily live with, and that could precipitate, as I say, a political abandonment within Massachusetts, within the region, within the country, within the world, of the entire climate project, the entire climate proposition. I'm sorry, and this slide raises a different point, so I won't go there. I think Albert Einstein was being unduly modest here, but his words of wisdom probably persist for the rest of us. And so I would pose a question to you all. If we do stay with this problem, what can we then do? How can we? I will tell you that although I don't want to prejudice your deliberations and your thought processes, but a retreat from natural gas has to be on the table. Many people have decided. We can't really pay for both systems. And so the question is, assuming we can't do away with fossil fuels either, even by 2050, that there's going to have to be the availability of fossil fuels to keep some people warm and to accomplish some other purposes. Nevertheless, how can we what would a smart retreat or retirement of the natural gas system look like so that the electric system can grow to take its place in a way that doesn't endanger either economic health or the public's health, but nevertheless doesn't insist on a layering on of both cost structures for the same out years, a prospect that, as I say, would simply outstrip people's capacity to pay. We're wrestling with this issue of what a smart managed retreat would look like. As you all know, the terms managed retreat are often invoked these days with respect to real estate on the coastline, a coastline that might be subject to erosion and erratic weather. And people are wrestling with the very difficult issue of managing that retreat in a way that's not precipitous and reckless, but smart, but nevertheless effective. Here too, I would submit, we're going to have to figure out how to retreat in a smart way from natural gas in ways that don't carry the costs over into the 2050s and the 2060s. We need to downsize the system even as we upsize electric power. The question I'm wrestling with is how to do that. And I welcome any comments or or proposals you guys have. And I want
Senator,
to thank you, Ron, again for having me.
well, Senator, one of the goals of the forum is to essentially provide a platform for the public to be informed on issues that are of consequence to their lives. And your presentation has given us a lot of information, a very sobering information and assessment of where we are today and where we need to go. So I want to thank you for that. I do have one question. I know there's a lot of questions. I'd ask people to raise their hands. I've been following the chat, so I know there are a lot of questions. But Senator, I do have an observation and a question. I served for a while on the United States Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, and it was charged with looking at how we manage our nuclear waste. One of my colleagues, Dan Metley, is also online this morning. He was a member. And one of the lessons learned from that experience was that we have to get the public engaged. They have to be committed and understand what the demands are, what the solutions are, and they have to become engaged. And frankly, our nuclear waste is still a problem. We haven't been very forthcoming with the public. The Department of Energy is attempting a consent-based siting approach to all of this. But it suggests to me that in order to get the public engaged in our energy and electrification needs, there's got to be a social science aspect to the way the legislature approaches them, the way technology approaches them, meaning the electric suppliers. And I'm just wondering, what do you see in terms of the legislative activity that might engage the public directly? And is there anything like an area where you could imagine a quick success that would show the public that both the legislature and technology suppliers can do something constructive and meaningful and provide them with confidence? Anything like that in the works?
Ron, if you're, thank you. It's a great question and a great comment. And I'll bet, and I think we probably have a great deal to learn by the way other difficult issues like nuclear are being managed. And of course, nuclear, by the way, certainly has to be a part of the electric generation solution going forward. I strongly believe in that. However, if you're in my shoes, you see the public being engaged all the time. You don't see a lack of engagement. Granted, the engagement is somewhat selective. Not everybody attends to these issues because people's lives are complicated. But out my way, and I represent 8 different communities from Waltham and Chelmsford to Lexington, Lincoln, and Concord and Bedford. I see an enormous amount of community engagement, and it's growing by the year. Basically, people are scared stiff of climate change. We all have kids and grandkids. Some of those kids and grandkids are deciding that they can't afford to have kids, and it's partially a matter of being able to afford housing, but a significant part of it has to do with pessimism about the future. So I am a recipient of incoming communications constantly. I'm talking about email, but I'm also talking about talks on the streets with my neighbors. When I walk downtown, people buttonhole me. I don't see a lack of engagement. Instead, what I see is the sheer complexity of the problem. It is true, people's eyes glaze over as you attempt to get into any detail. This stuff is incredibly complex. Here's what people have told me, though. Again, I in my job, I get a lot of engagement. They're telling me that they're very concerned about the cost of living. And that's even more true when your district is less upper middle class than mine, and you're talking to working class people, and of course, people with very little money. Folks are very sensitive to cost. Cost signals matter of all kinds, and you can use those cost signals. But what I know already, based on decades of engaging with my constituents, is that people cannot tolerate these costs. I don't need more engagement to tell me that if my electric bill is going to go up hundreds and hundreds of dollars. My gas bill simply has to go down. It just does. So as a consequence of public engagement, I'm looking for ways to manage the retreat from natural gas. Not down to zero. I don't want to get into an argument with some of the people here about how far down we can go. We're going to have to go down. And everyone, regardless of your view towards fossil fuels, has to accept that we need to be using much less of B in order to accommodate the cost of using more of A. So I am interested. Now, what would retreats look like, Ron? I'll just mention two ideas, but they'll give you a sense as to how down to earth these rather rarefied discussions have to become if you're in my shoes. Possibility number one, we should ban the expansion of natural gas in any places in which it doesn't exist today. That's a very moderate idea. It seems dramatic at first, but there you're not penalizing anybody who's using natural gas today. You're not penalizing any towns that depend on natural gas today. 30% of the state uses fuel oil or wood. 30% of Massachusetts isn't dependent on natural gas. The pipelines were never built out to those communities and out to those neighborhoods. So the first thing you want to do is to adopt a kind of climate-oriented version of the Hippocratic Oath. As we all know, doctors pledge, above all, not to do any harm. We have to pledge not to do additional harm to our long-term prospects in terms of emissions, but also sheer affordability. And doing no harm for the climate means not building out natural gas where it currently doesn't exist. That would be a dramatic thing for Massachusetts to do, and yet I think it's a moderate idea to, and here I'm using a loose metaphor, to end the bleeding. Bleeding in terms of emissions and bleeding in terms of costs. But there's more you could do. There are anti-competitive provisions of state law that we don't think of as anti-competitive. 100 years ago, the utilities worked to create a right not to be warm in Massachusetts, but specifically to get natural gas delivered to your house. So there is a state law still on the books, and it's used by the utilities every day. And the state law says this: if natural gas is delivered to the houses surrounding the house I'm building as a developer, I have a legal right to insist that the gas service line be extended to my new residence. There is a right, again, not to be warm, but very specifically a right to be warm in one specific way using a fossil fuel. I would suggest to you that decades-old right, which is used by developers all the time to insist on the extension of natural gas in a community that does have it, has to morph, has to evolve into a broader right to have some source of fuel and of heating that enables one's family to stay comfortable at an affordable price. If we could morph that right to natural gas, which, by the way, in state law is matched, interestingly, by a corresponding obligation to serve. So we ordain that utilities not extend you a form of staying warm. We have created an obligation to connect natural gas service to your house if it's generally available on the pipes running by your home out on the street. What do you think about, and I don't want to bog this down in specific ideas, but you're beginning to see what we could do to make sure that we're not paying for both in every community in Massachusetts, because requiring the people pay for both at expanding costs. You've seen the cost for natural gas, and we were just talking about the gas leak replacement program, and you've seen my slides demonstrating the increase in cost of electric power. We can't ask people to do both. So some very difficult.
I agree, Senator. I agree, and I think your answer puts real perspective on what you're dealing with, and I appreciate that. There are some hands up, so let's move on to a couple of those folks. Walter, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. A great presentation. But I do have a concern about meeting future demand growth, in particular for peak load. So, and also summer versus winter. And as you know, the Mystic Station is going to come offline July 1st, and that's a natural gas fired combined cycle. And I think that's 1,200 megawatts. And at the same time, there's some wind generation, and maybe Vineyard Wind would be ready by that time. But what are the projections for meeting demand growth, not only in the summer peak, which is air conditioning, of course, during the day, but also in the winter peak at night when there's no solar being produced. Um, and so how can that be met? And I'm thinking one way of meeting it is with time of use pricing. Another way is battery backup. At my house, I have solar power and I have battery backup. And
Yeah,
I
no,
sure would
Walter,
like
I'm
to.
with you. I get it. Yeah, I just so just to cut to the chase, because I know there are probably many comments. Technology, and a lot of you folks are technologists, is going to supply yet additional roads for us to travel. I just left a presentation because I'm taking part in the Clean Energy Transmission Working Group set up by the 2022 State Climate Act. And we were discussing, Walter, yet additional things, not only the things you've mentioned, but something that the Biden administration is very interested in, advanced reconductoring, essentially the use of technology to use existing transmission much more efficiently. A lot of times those transmission lines sit underutilized for a whole bunch of reasons. Science and technology are delivering us better tools for figuring out how to get more out of the stuff we've already built. So in addition to solar and in addition to batteries, you're going to see a lot of grid enhancement technology. They call them GATs. Grid enhancing technology is going to be used so that we can avoid new construction and, of course, new expense wherever possible, and get more out of a resource that in many times of the day or year is underutilized.
Yeah. And Mike, just to follow up on that, if you could give us a status of Vineyard Wind, and I understand Vineyard Wind is going to be 7.9 cents a kilowatt hour, and is the ISO required to accept any and all electricity generated by Vineyard Wind at that price, and how does that filter into the pricing scheme?
We are going to have today, Walter, there are about 12 of those 62 offshore windmills that are going to get built, despite the delays we've been reading about, which are real and worrying with respect to future offshore wind construction projects. We will have, by this time in 2024, we will have the only fully operational offshore windmill anywhere in the United States, offshore wind. And we'll have 62 windmills out there in the ocean, where we have 12 today. The price of that electricity is written into a 20-year contract. It's a pretty good price, actually. The problem is that all the future offshore wind stuff is going to have to be repriced and rebid, as you know. And because of the war in Ukraine, the general ravages of inflation, specific supply chain difficulties, the cost per megawatt hour of that power is going to be significant, but is unavoidable. At least, although inflation's coming down, so today's realities could look different 2 years from now. But to your point, I think we're going to be paying a lot for electric power. We do have to green the grid for reasons that are independent of price, because the planet's perishing, and that's real. And so, yeah, we're going to have to make sure the natural gas piece doesn't extend we're essentially going to have to change GSEP. This leak detection, Mothers Out Front 10 years ago was instrumental in getting us to address this question of natural gas pipeline leaks. They've changed their minds. They've decided that they gave insufficient thought to the long-term costs of essentially building new fossil fuel infrastructure at a time when we're supposed to be retiring fossil fuel infrastructure. That insufficient thought was given because all of us were in a rush to address. Remember, public engagement's not a problem. We get a shitload of public engagement. And 10 years ago, it said, we don't care what else you do, replace those new pipes. Now the same group is saying, whoa, wait a second, replacing those old pipes with new pipes commit us to using fossil fuels for another 30 years. That may not have turned out to be such a great idea. And incidentally, there are solutions there too. There are always solutions. We've moved from replacing leaky pipes to repairing them, something that makes the utilities much less money, but we're moved legislatively in the 2022 Climate Act to repair instead of replace. And in the next iteration, the next Climate Act we do, we're going to have to add retire instead of repair or replace. Retire the system wherever it's prudent and safe to do so. Don't just replace it wholesale, which is very pricey. Repair it. Point repairs are less expensive. Consider when you can get off natural gas altogether. That retirement conversation, in a sense, is a conversation we're having right now.
Senator, I'm hunching the clock on your schedule. I'd like to take another question, or maybe two if we can, but
yeah, let's do two more.
Eddie, go. You're up.
Yes, well, I think you answered a little bit about my question, which is related to efficiency, which the usage of power and the incentives to increase efficiency of use in buildings and so forth. That would be one question I'd like to pose as to what exactly are you doing in that respect. The second question is more related to something that you pointed out, I think, which is that different communities have different structures of their use of energy and also of their ability to pay for that energy and also for the upcoming upgrades and so forth. And my question is really, can it be possible to provide incentives for localities to essentially organize and do things on scale? The problem that I see is that people who really just can't afford these bills, maybe there's a way in which their communities could be incentivized to come together and develop, say, battery storage systems, that kind of thing that could be assisted by the state.
Thank you, Eddie. We are giving localities a lot of additional tools. We actually passed major bills here in Massachusetts in both 2021 and 2022. Each of them have 100 different sections, lots of different moving parts, lots of things going on in both those major omnibus climate initiatives. And we did provide for additional options for localities. But the challenge is that industrial scale batteries, which is to say batteries that could serve an entire community or an entire neighborhood, can't even be financed effectively by most municipal governments as a practical matter. You need state and even federal participation. What was your first issue?
Efficiency.
And
I think you partly addressed that.
Yeah, Mass Save is, depending on the year, because these things are rated by a national trade association, either the #1 or the #2 energy efficiency undertaking in the country, and has been for a good decade. So we've done a lot on the energy efficiency front. If by that you mean making sure, if you want to talk about residential, that the heat or the electric power that comes into your house does maximum work and doesn't leak out or work inefficiently. We have to do a lot more. The whole question of energy efficiency becomes highly problematic because it's predicated on the idea that less is more. But in a climate regime, exactly the opposite becomes true, and energy efficiency becomes a awkward idea. We want people to use more electricity, less fossil fuels. As soon as you want people to use more of X, energy efficiency as it was originally conceived 10 years ago needs radically redrawing, because we want you to exceed your use of electricity, even as you downsize your use of natural gas and home heating oil. That just calls for a different scheme. That's a short answer.
Right, but there are simple things like changing the color of the of tiling on your roof.
Yeah, so no question. And we want to do all of that. It won't scale enough to help us out with the massive problem we face, but it's all very important. Absolutely.
And the other part of it is local grids. The IEEE, for example, have looked at DC local grids utilizing just solar panels and so forth. I don't know if that is part of where you are looking as well.
So the good news, thank you, Eddie. The good news is that everything you've read about is being done. It may not be, it may need refining. It may not be happening on exactly the scale you would like. Everything you've heard about, read about, talked about, worried about is being tried. And the question is, there are so many moving parts to this issue that that you have to constantly refine your approach. So very specifically, we spend a lot of time thinking about microgrids because they're a source of resiliency. If the electric grid, which is going to be driving everything from your heating system to your car, goes down, microgrids are an important source of, well, of backup power. So yes, a lot of effort is being spent figuring out how to situate microgrid and enable people and communities to afford those.
Senator, I'm very sensitive to your calendar, and I don't know whether you have time for one more question.
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay.
These are good questions, and I really appreciate them.
Albert, you're up.
Yeah, Senator, on your point of not building the two networks, electric and gas, would it make sense and be socially acceptable to say in the southeast of Massachusetts, where all the wind energy is coming, to say, okay, we develop the electrical network there, we put the money there, and tell them no more gas, and then do the gas in the other areas? Does it make sense to do something like that?
Probably not, Albert, for this reason. That wind power coming in from offshore feeds into a New England-wide network, not one that is not specific to southeastern Mass. So you wouldn't want to tell the region that serves as the landing place for a regional resource like wind that it should do X. That's point number one. You do want to strengthen the grid out there because just as a matter of engineering, all the offshore wind has to come ashore someplace. But that place in the end is part of a New England-wide system. And a lot of the electrons you're sucking in and landing in the Southeast are needed in Boston, which is the big load center. And by Boston, I mean Winchester, I mean greater Boston. So we're dealing with all kinds of other ideas. Maybe the electricity should not come ashore in southeastern Mass, although that's where the current plans are. It's the shortest point, after all, from the windmills to the shore and to the grid that you can access. But there are engineers and companies, and I heard from one this morning saying, you know what, route that electricity over the greater expanse underwater, but directly to the load center, which is Boston. It'll cost more to build the transmission line because it covers a greater expanse of miles, but then you get to the load center directly, and you don't have to improve the grid beginning in the southeast so that it ports up effectively to the load center in greater Boston. You could go direct. Engineers are wonderful problem solvers. I know I'm talking to a lot of engineers. All the different possibilities are on the table, but each has a cost and a time factor associated with it. And so juggling all this becomes a real challenge.
Senator, I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for joining us today. You're
Sure, happy to have done it. Thank you, Ron.
well. Let me just say, your leadership on these topics in the legislature is really critical, and I think we're all grateful for the fact that you're so deeply involved and committed. If we can be of any help to you in going forward, I hope you'll feel free to contact us, because this is something of great interest and great concern to this group. So I thank you for this.
Thank you. I will take you up on that. You happen to constitute an important group of thinkers, and that's why I wanted to talk to you all. I want you to know that Chris Knittel, my friend and neighbor, came back from his presentation to you all last week, singing your praises, and now I can see why.
Well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. I'd like to bring the session to an end, but I'd like to wish everyone a happy holiday. Thanksgiving just a few days away. So have a good one, everyone. Senator, thank you again, and enjoy the weekend and holiday. Take care, guys.
Thank